Broadcasting live from the Phoenix Business RadioX studio in Tempe, Arizona. You are tuning in to Culture Crush with Kendra Maples. This podcast will dive into a variety of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Culture Crush. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with a good company culture. We talk with company leaders to learn about real-life experiences, tips, and best practices for creating a healthy work environment. We will also share resources that are helping support growing a good company culture. On this podcast, we continue to highlight these amazing companies that are crushing it with a good company culture, but we also want to highlight the resources that are supporting those companies. So today we have Andy Maurer and Thomas Goodman. Hello.
Hi.
And before we really start to jump in with them and what they do in their roles, I do want to mention our sponsor, Catholic Education Arizona. If you haven't heard of them, please look them up. They are a phenomenal organization that's doing some pretty fantastic things for students. Catholic Education Arizona corporate partners include some like APS, BBVA, Grand Canyon University, and over 120 others. So consider using your Arizona corporate tax credit to educate the underserved children. You can call them at 602-218-6542, or you can visit them at www.ceaz.org. I'll say that again, www.ceaz.org. Okay, now we're going to jump into the real meat. I am very excited to have both of you on. We've kind of met through different networks and collaboration opportunities, and there's some real strong alignment with the two of you when it comes to company culture. I could, of course, read a bio and tell people about your company and what you do, but that's not as fun as hearing it from both of you. So I want to give each of you the chance to tell us about what you do, your role with helping companies and their company culture. We have an hour, so you don't have to give the elevator spiel. Really tell us a little bit about what you do. And I'll start with you, Tom.
Okay. Age before beauty, I guess, huh? Okay.
He was looking at me.
Yeah. Thanks, Kendra. It's great to be here. So I am a chair of a CEO group with an organization called Vistage Worldwide. And Vistage is a large organization, worldwide organization, 24,000 members worldwide. And the groups consists of CEOs in one group, and they have other groups with C-suite members that support CEOs. But it's a peer advisory board setup. And what the peer advisory boards do allows CEOs to come in and connect with other CEOs to help them to become better leaders and help increase and accelerate their company's growth and profitability. So we do that by interacting, by working with one another and sharing our experiences, sharing our troubles, sharing our successes, and essentially learning from one another. It's much better. A lot of CEOs understand what it's like to be isolated. There's that isolation relief that being in a group with 12 to 14, 15, 16 other CEOs and being able to share your experiences and being able to ask the questions that no one around you in your company can answer. As a chair of a group like this, I'm a former company, I still am a company president, but I've led a couple of companies in my career as well. My job really is to be a facilitator there and to help people follow a constructive discussion and to keep the conversation focused around how to help one another. Culture comes into that discussion a lot. And it's kind of interesting because we have two different levels of culture in a Vistage group. We've got our group culture, which is built around trust. It's built around integrity. It's built around vulnerability and built around diversity. We want to have as many schools of thought in that group as possible. And so we want to foster a great culture in that group because it allows the group to perform at a high level and be able to give the members lots and lots of value. And then in turn, what we learn there, a lot of times the CEOs will take that back to their companies and build that into their company's culture. So we're working at a couple of different levels. And we've got of culture, and we've got people that come in and work with us on that. And in fact, Andy is one of those, which is one of the reasons I know Andy so well. He's actually been in and spoken to our group, and I won't tell you what he does, but I will tell you he does a great job of it. But anyway, that's my story. How about you, Andy?
Yeah, I am an emotional wellness coach for high level leaders. So I work specifically with CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs who need help bridging the gap between their professional life and their personal life. I think there's a lot of support in the business and leadership industry around helping them achieve success professionally. I don't think there's as many resources to help the leader know how to access emotion, how to build more connected relationships, not just through strategy, but actually meaningful, deep friendships and relationships with their spouse or kiddos. And my job is to both help them actually help free them up personally, both emotionally and different things going on the inside so that they can perform at a higher capacity on the outside professionally.
And one of the things that I love is that when you and I chatted, we had the chance to, mention a couple of these things. And I'm sure we'll dive into it a little bit, but especially right now, right? You've got all of this craziness over the past year with COVID, and you've got people that are remote, and then all of a sudden one day they're slowly coming back into the office, but some aren't. And how do you balance your people? But at the same time, how are you as a leader balancing, and doing? Before we start to really dive into some of these pieces, I want to ask both of you what your interpretation of culture is, because I feel like we know what it is, right? We have a whole show based around it, but that meaning can be slightly different. And then Tom, even you're mentioning that you've got the culture of these CEOs and these leaders for their companies, but then you've got a different culture within that group. So kind of supporting and balancing on those aspects too. So Andy, when you're working with these different high leaders and you're trying to help them so that they can, build that company culture, when you're talking with these higher level professionals and you're talking about culture, what is that you're referring to? Like, what is the culture? What is that meaning to you?
Well, a lot of them want really healthy cultures. And I think they understand that a lot of the newer research around culture, psychological safety, employee well being has to do with culture. And that adds to retention, that adds to a lot of lost money that goes away in a company when there isn't a healthy culture. And what leaders are beginning to recognize more and more is that who they are and how they operate drives a lot of that culture. And I think that the one thing that I see most with leaders is they feel that they have to suit up or put on this
Mhm.
idea of what culture should be. And to me, culture is a set of distinctives or values or ways of thinking or being that get filtered throughout the system. If you think about a family, generally, my family has distinctives about what make us the Mowers and what does that entail? Where do we live? What kind of pets do we have? What kind of things do we like to do? When people think of us, what comes to mind? And leaders drive that boat. And oftentimes, though, what's so difficult is they have models on who they're supposed to be, but they've lost the ability to tap into who they're built to be. And when we try to force a culture, when we try to force a leadership idea of how we're supposed to come off, then we actually transmit that down into employees and teaching them not to actually come to work with their authentic self, but to come to work putting on something that isn't really of benefit to the organization. Because we know that the best employees are those who are in alignment and the right seats on the bus and bringing their unique values and gifts to the table and freely able to fail and to grow and to bring their unique selves to help that company grow. And if a leader isn't doing that, then employees won't do that.
Do you see that happen in many cases with some of the leaders that you're talking with? Do you, through those conversations, see that there is a very two-sided, view happening at work? Like maybe that leader is, like you said, kind of forcing that culture on them. So then the employees are almost like scared into that role, right? Almost like that fear-based, you have to fit this culture.
Well, if a leader comes to work and they assume that the way they're supposed to be is charismatic and powerful and not show any weaknesses or flaws or cracks, and they have to maintain a high level of energy, naturally, even non-verbally, they're sending this message to the staff, to their leaders, to their managers that when you show up at work, you bring certain parts of yourself. And they usually look highly energetic. They look very well put together. And it doesn't mean that leaders have to open up and expose everything. That's actually not a healthy culture. But there's ways in which I think, and maybe we can get into this, and maybe Tom has ideas as well too. But how do leaders come to work and create space for culture to not be assumed, but culture to develop based on what we're learning about the people, of what they struggle with, what they desire, and what they need as people?
I agree with everything Andy has said. I couldn't have said it nearly as eloquently as he did. But one of the things that's really key, and a word you use, was authenticity.
Mhm.
And ultimately, in a Vistage group, in a peer advisory group, or in a company, we want to bring value. I mean, that's why we're all there. So the culture is there, not only to serve the company greater good, but to serve the people as well. Because we're not machines, we're not business machines, we're people. And so that authenticity is so important, because we do see people come into groups, and you will say to them, so what's going on with this, and how are things going? Yeah, everything's fine. Well, any of us that have run a company know that at no point in your life is anything is it ever, everything's fine, right? I mean, we know that. And so just giving people the psychological safety and the space to be able to open up and say, yeah, it's a total mess, right?
You can say it.
Yeah,
It
no,
can be a shit show.
even no.
You can say it.
Yeah, so giving them the space, and having the people around them that respect them, trust them, and that trust is runs both ways, of course, is super important. But it's all about giving everybody the opportunity to be the most authentic and yet valuable self they can be, to not only themselves, but to each other.
hmm
And when I think about authenticity, we're talking about what it means to naturally be a human being. Human beings don't operate as vehicles, which means they operate at high levels. I can drive all the way to California and back, and generally my car will keep going. It just needs more gas, and I have a manual and I have a system for it to drive and keep going. Human beings are extremely complex, and they have different needs. They have different wants. Their moods shift and alter. And it's very important that we allow people to come as humans to tap into their true potential of what they can offer. And I think one thing that gets in the way of that is when leaders don't allow themselves to fail.
hmm
They're terrified to fail, because failure means a decrease from that image on what they thought they were supposed to be. And yet failure is actually the freedom to grow. If you haven't failed, or if you don't know how to fail, you really don't have the freedom to grow. You've just somehow acquired success miraculously. um, but you're not actually growing, because you don't know what it's like to fail and face that, and then to move through that. And we want our people to fail.
hmm
In teams, we want people to fail. And I'll talk about a little bit later about the Project Aristotle that Google found, that failure was a unique dynamic in creating really powerful and successful teams.
Right. I heard a story from a friend of mine when she was growing up, and when they would come to the dinner table, the father would ask the question, how'd your day go? Blah, blah, blah. And then what didn't go well? What'd you fail at today? And the kids got used to talking about the
hmm
things that had screwed up. And then the next question was, well, what'd you learn from that?
hmm
And and that just really made an impression on me, because, as Andy just said, it's failure has such a bad reputation, honestly,
hmm
and it's the only way we learn. It's when my kids were really young, I was a big one of a big proponent of experiential learning.
hmm
And if there was no injury or sudden death involved, let them go. And they'll figure out that this or that they're not supposed to do, or it doesn't work well if you do that, rather than being told. So yeah, I think failure has gotten a bad rap for
Oh,
sure.
absolutely.
And allowing people to be authentic and talk about what's not going well, or even, and these are some of the things we talk about, even in people's past, what didn't go well in the past.
hmm
It's like, oh gosh, all of a sudden this reminds me of stuff that happened back then that's still having an effect on how I'm performing as a
hmm
person.
But we're learning at this point that is something, we're learning because of tools and folks like you two. We're learning that these are things to talk about and discuss. And I love your example about the question at the dinner table, because we do that at our house too. It's not a simple, hey, how was your day? Because I'm going to say, great, how was yours? right? It's a
Yeah.
one word, it's a smiley face and a thumbs up. The reality is that wasn't the whole day, right?
Right.
And you said, you're not going to come in and say, oh, everything's fantastic. No, you're not running a company and having it be fantastic, right, Tom? So
Right.
we asked that other question of, okay, well, what was the low in your day? And then let's talk through it so that it's not this thing that's kind of pushed to the side, right?
There's a song out right now that the chorus goes something like, "Truth be told, the truth is rarely told."
Ooh,
Whoa, that's a
Yeah.
new quote that's going on my
right?
wall.
Yeah.
Truth be told. Say it again for everyone.
The truth be told, the truth is rarely told.
I love that. That's going to be a quote. We're going to make you sing it next time, though.
Well, you don't want me to do that. Trust me.
Tom brought his guitar. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Right.
But as far as, having those conversations, right? Both of you are having those rough conversations with your groups, right? Tom, you and
Yeah.
your Vistage group, you're having them discuss these things that are not going right.
Right.
And then Andy, you're getting to the bottom of it, right? How does that process look when somebody hires you to come in? They already have to be a little vulnerable to, I think, just to even come to you and say, okay, this is some support I need, right? So then how does that process I know it's a big question, but how does that kind of work?
Well, I like to think of when you create soil that allows seeds to grow, those seeds will naturally kind of come forth. And the soil that I found that's most helpful for leaders is a safe, confidential space that allows them to show up naturally who they're built to be as humans with their successes and their struggles in a non-shaming environment. And I know that's a lot, but essentially it's this soil that allows leaders to show up and be themselves. And they don't really have a whole lot of spaces in their life where they can do that. They don't have it at home. When they get home, typically their spouse is frustrated that they're not doing enough at home. And when they go to work, they feel the pressure that they have to be on and a certain person, or they have to come off a certain way. So when they step into my office, it's a sacred space because it allows them to know I don't need anything from that leader in that space. And I think that's one of the magical transformative things, because most leaders, as soon as they acquire money and fame and success and leadership, everybody wants something from them. They want an introduction, they want money, they want everything else. And when they sit there with me, to have me be that person that is simply there to show up for them and to help them thrive and be heard and understood is a unique space. And I think that's why I've had such great successes, because I work so hard to cultivate a very safe, warm soil for leaders to grow in.
Mm-hmm. And then when you're working through things with them, you're obviously, like you said, you're learning more about them than they're going to open up to probably their spouse or their staff or anything like that. And then how do kind of those next steps work as far as really supporting them and understanding, right? Maybe it's somebody that you're like, hey, you're the problem at your work, right? Like, how do you kind of work through some of that so that they can then go work with their team back at their office?
One of the best ways to do that is to help them understand, access, understand, and communicate what they feel.
Mm-hmm.
That allows them to have a stronger sense of emotional attunement and self awareness. And research shows that the emotionally intelligent leader is able to read cues in other people. Him or her are able to pick up on things, on what someone across the room is feeling from them, and actually help manage the emotions of other people that they come in contact with, and not manage as a way to shut them down, but as a way to handle them and navigate through them instead of running away from them. And really, I teach leaders to not be afraid of emotion because there's a lot of emotion that comes out in businesses and in leadership and with people. And therefore, if a leader is afraid of the emotion that's inside of themselves, they will run away from another person who evokes emotion inside of them, such as anger or fear or disappointment. And what I do is I help them feel safe with that. I help them sit in that. I help them make sense of that. So then when they go back to the culture and they go back to the people, they're no longer forcing people to come their direction and get fixed. They're able to sit in the room with people who are struggling or who have mistakes or who have failures, who have insecurities, and handle the discomfort of that and show up as a great leader. Really show up as someone who shows up as a leader and is ready to care for, guide and direct and support.
How does that look as far as, I mean, it's not an overnight thing, right?
Yes,
So how yes, it is.
it is not an overnight thing.
Right.
You are correct.
Yes. So how does that look as far as that relationship they build with you and, how you're informing them and teaching them and coaching them and walking through all of this so that they can go back to their work and show that emotional side to their teams? How does that process of kind of that timeline look with all of this?
Well, a lot of it early on in coaching is me sitting down with leaders and simply asking them, "Hey, I would love to know a little bit more about your story. Where do you come from? Tell me about some of your family dynamics." Because what we're seeing from ages 0 to 18 is we're getting a really good picture on how the subconscious brain is built. What are the subconscious drives around attainment and fear and wanting to be known or wanting to have significance? All those are pretty rooted from 0 to 18. So we dig into that and we explore, where do you come from? Help me understand your past to make sense of your present. And then from that journey, really what we do is we apply some techniques and tools on how do we want to shift that and how do we want to adjust that. And I think what's most important is I give leaders the power then to make choice in their life. Oftentimes, if we're unaware of our subconscious brain or our emotional brain, it is actually driving our behavior. We're not aware of it, but it's driving the choices we make. It's driving, fear is driving who we feel like we have to be or where we're going in life. And when we identify those things, it gives us a power, it gives us a freedom to then ask ourselves, is this really how I want to live? Is this really who I'm built to be? Is this the way I want to lead?
Mhm.
And those questions don't come after we have awareness of places of fear, places of insecurity, places of emotional discomfort.
Mhm. And with everything that you're doing and everything that you're working with this leader on, is this kind of the same process? Tom, did he come in and just do a presentation with you guys? Or I want
Well,
to kind of bring it back to you and how this whole connection
yeah, I
happened.
mean, I'd like to make, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Andy, but there's an overlap in what we do.
Hmm.
I'm working with leaders on their business process, and certainly everything Andy is talking about is important. How people show up as, or how leaders show up as people.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's very important for all of us to have that awareness. We don't do that kind of deep work in a group.
Hmm.
That's we leave that in the hands of the professionals. Don't try this at home, kind of thing, right? But at the same time, what one thing Andy said that really struck a chord with me is when you're a leader and you've got people around you, everybody wants something from you.
Hmm.
They want a paycheck. They want, a consultant wants another contract, introductions, as Andy said. And one of the things that's awesome about having a group of other CEOs around you is you can be absolutely authentic with them because they don't care. They don't need a paycheck from you. Really, the only thing they want is they want you to be successful.
Hmm.
And so, we're working on that, the end of what they're doing, which is the mechanics of the business and how they're dealing with those problems. We want them to be open about what they're doing and about what they're feeling, because that's when the real work starts happening in terms of opening yourself up as a leader, as Andy's already explained. When they have trouble doing that, we'll send them to Andy. As a matter of fact, well, he did. I didn't answer your question. Andy came in and did what'd you do, about a couple, 2.5 hours with us, I think.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And, we have other speakers come in. That's part of what we do. We bring in speakers on a variety of business topics. And I met Andy. I think he reached out to me on LinkedIn, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Wow, this guy looks interesting." We got on the phone and he sounded interesting. And then we went out and just, it's been a great relationship ever since. And so I said, you know what? I think that would be awesome for him to speak to Vistage groups in general. So I introduced him to some people, and you'd already been doing keynote speaking and that sort of thing. He came in to our group and did a couple, 2.5 hour, I think. And I had my members coming up to me and saying, "That was the best. Man, I cannot believe how great that was." We were going around talking to people about their experiences, and we've got guys, ex-military guys. These are the guys, everything's going great, and at the, while he was talking, a couple of them are kind of stopping and just, so he really got them going. I mean, it was a really amazing, tender almost moment for all of us,
Mhm.
and so that builds that trust, that opens the vulnerability, and the more you are trusting with people, the more you are vulnerable with them, the more that you can share and receive, and then take that back to your own organizations. So the type of thing that Andy is doing is amazing and just improves people as leaders and people. We use that to move our members in a direction to do what we can do, which is, as I said, there's a little bit of overlap with what we do, but the really professional work on that that's Andy's
Well,
wheelhouse.
I'll say this. I mean, not every leader of a group, a Vistage group or a YPO group or a EO group, knows how to create a safe enough space to have those conversations. So I will
Yeah.
just say this on your behalf, Tom. Tom is actually very talented at allowing those conversations to have and creating space for those conversations to be had. And not every Vistage leader is. I've met a lot, and I've met EO groups, and I've done a ton of work with Vistage groups, or I'm sorry, YPO groups. And, not every leader cultivates that space. And I think that's why we had that moment. And I think the reason why that moment is so important to have is because it creates freedom for people to say to feel what they feel and to know what they know. A lot of people are hiding from what they feel or pushing it down, and then they don't want to address what they actually know that they don't really want to talk about. So it's letting them feel what they feel and know what they know. And out of that creates a transformative experience.
Right.
Mhm.
But you have to cultivate that soil. And Tom, you actually do a great job doing that.
Well, and that's the difference between, we talk about how often there's the difference between a boss and a leader, right?
Right.
The boss is that one that's signing your paycheck, here you go, but not necessarily taking that next step, right?
Right.
Of what we're talking about here. You guys are helping create leaders and cultivate those leaders so that they can go back to their team and they can be vulnerable and they can be authentic and they can show emotion, right? Whereas there's that difference of just that boss that's just
Mm.
almost, it's like the scare tactic of
Yeah. I
go
another
in.
another great quote. You might I can't take credit for this, but I can't remember who or where I read it. But a boss will light a fire under you, and a leader lights a fire in you.
Yep,
Fantastic.
that's a good one. Yeah. But it really is true, right?
Yeah.
You've got those moments where, and I think you had mentioned wanting to talk about this too, that whole kind of fear-based leader, situation, as far as like putting on that leadership rather than living it out. You had mentioned that. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, people feel people feel in an organization and in a structure or a culture when the leader is operating out of fear or operating out of freedom. They can sense it, they can feel it. And that's something that's really important to notice around human behavior is we often think that if we don't communicate verbally something that people don't know. Let me just tell you that human beings, we pick up on body posture, tone of voice, eye contact, and nonverbals much more than we do verbals. So, when a leader operates out of fear, they might say, "No one in my organization knows that I operate out of fear." Well, they can sense it and they can feel it. And leaders often operate out of fear because they have this idea that they have to be this certain person, and it's like a coat that they have to put on every day, and it gets exhausting. They don't really know who they are sometimes. Not every leader, but some leaders lose a sense to be able to distinguish who am I and who I have to be. And the further those get apart, the more likelihood that there's going to be burnout. There's going to be a heavy handedness in an organization when who I am and who I have to be, there's a huge divide there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of leaders, if we use this idea of, have you ever done pottery, Tom?
Poorly.
Poorly.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you know pottery,
I know it's hard.
You stick the clay on the wheel, you kick the wheel, or you turn it on and it spins the clay. Now, with pottery, you apply both of your hands around the pot. You get water on the clay and you apply pressure externally. And as you do that, the clay will move up and it will move in. And you can use tools externally to shape it, to define it, to make it look really pretty on the outside. But there's a problem there because If you just apply pressure on the outside, there will be no holding capacity on the inside. It will be completely dense. You actually have to take your hand on the top of the clay, stick your hand down into the clay, and apply pressure out from the inside. And what that does is that creates a vastness. It creates width and depth on the inside, and it allows you to push back on those external forces. And I think what leaders are naturally gifted at is kind of this chameleon mentality where they can show up and they can become whatever they need to be, wherever they need to be. And they're so used to their external world applying pressure to tell them who they're supposed to be. But in that process, they lose a sense of who they are until they actually have to stick their hand down inside the middle of the pot and to figure out, who am I? What do I really want? What am I built for? And why am I living a life that other people have told me to live, but really that I don't want to live?
Hmm. I love that analogy. And I feel like you could almost use that analogy in the sense of that leader supporting their employees and their staff too, right?
Mm.
Not just pushing from the outside, here's this development workshop here, you know what I mean? But really truly trying to find the way to connect with your employees as humans and go into the inside and figure out who they are, what do they need? Do they need more than just that paycheck?
Right.
How else can you truly support them as a person? I feel like we can almost use that analogy in that sense too.
And I do want to be careful because it's so common that we look at the leader and we poke holes in them about problems that they have. And I just want to address and have empathy on leaders because the state of leadership that we've created in the US is extremely toxic. That it actually is a culture of what we tell leaders they're supposed to look like, men and women. And let's be honest, not all employees in an organization are healthy.
Hmm.
So they project upon a leader, whether it's a male or a female, this ideal image of what they need that leader to be for them. It's extremely common, and I know this sounds funny, but it's extremely common for employees to see that leader as either a father or a mother, and they're trying to get needs met through that leader that they never got early on. Now, they would never say that, but it comes out in really unhealthy ways, and they imply these unrealistic expectations on leaders to fill these voids for them when leaders aren't meant to do that. They're not meant to be a dad to the person. They're not meant to be a mom to the person. They're meant to be a boss. They're meant to be a leader. So part of it is both ways. The leader needs to build their own health, but also we need to reshape how we talk about leadership as a culture, and we need to equip employees to actually be healthy so that they stop sucking from leaders.
Hmm. And that's the next step of this, right? You two are providing the resources for the actual leader, the CEO themselves. And then the next step, which is really the purpose of why I started this show, is to be able to not only highlight companies that are doing a good job, but then what are the resources to help the CEOs, which you are doing? And then what are the resources to help the staff and help the employees? Because what you said right now, I think 98%, right, of employees are never going to admit that, even though, subconsciously that yes, they are looking to that leader for the support and the guidance they would look towards a
An
parent for.
affirmation? Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, if we could address affirmation in the workplace and needing to have significance and want someone to tell you you're good, you're valuable, you bring so much to this place. We as humans crave to have that, but when we are seeking that in an unhealthy way from a leader who has 1,000 employees and doesn't have the ability to address that to every single person, we're setting that leader up for failure, and we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's part of where culture comes in, right? Because culture is, we know this, especially being on a show like this. I mean, culture is a top-down thing, right?
Hmm.
And so if the head dog is doing that and encouraging, instructing, teaching, leading his team, it should nobody can see my air quotes right now, but it should filter down.
Hmm.
But it's hard enough. It's as Andy and I and all CEOs know that it's difficult enough to get the person on top to start doing that, and then to have him lead the others, and then lead the others to lead the people below them. It's a cascading thing that a lot of times just peters out the further down from the top you get.
Hmm.
And we have to ask questions. My mind gets boggled around the reality that how are these leaders who are so dysfunctional and unhealthy grow such powerful and successful organizations. And I think part of it, I've talked to a couple of people about this, is that people who work for those leaders don't want to stand up and speak back to the leader. They're either afraid or they're terrified or they haven't found their own power and their own strength. And what they really want is they just want to fall in line and do whatever someone tells them to do. And we need to empower people to actually begin to stand up and find that confidence inside to push back a little bit in a healthy way, to apply pressure on the leader that the way they're leading doesn't work. They're going to lose people, they're going to lose resources, they're going to lose teams. And I think, once again, I have to balance this conversation out with how do we show up for a leader? Because not all leaders are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
All leaders have areas of growth, but sometimes there are teams and there are people who don't know how to find their own strength to stand up and to speak their mind as a way to shape the leader, as a way to inform the leader on what they need from the leader.
Mm-hmm.
So it boggles my mind still, but I think part of it is that we haven't trained people in general how to be healthy enough to stand up and be strong. And I'm not talking about a narcissistic, abusive, toxic work culture, because that's different. What I'm talking about is really empowering people to speak up and be honest and transparent and communicate to leaders what they need from them.
This is interesting because when you said, I don't know how certain leaders have built, the very toxic leaders have built these amazingly successful in terms of money organizations. And I had a conversation with a member not too long ago where they had a customer, and the customer is just one of these people you're talking about. And they even showed me some of the communications with the customer. And I was like, I said, how many people like to work with somebody like this? The answer is none, right? But the thing was, this president of this company has a really great culture in her company. And it's taken a while for her to build that. And I said, would you accept this from people working for you, this kind of treatment, or would the people working for you accept this from you? Well, no. Well, so they've got this great company culture in this container, if you like, which is the company. And now there's an outside influence that's treating them poorly, for lack of a better word. And so, they're right now trying to work through with this customer. And I said, well, it's a good chunk of their revenue, right? So you can't drop kick them out the door, which you don't want to do with people in any case. But it's a difficult thing. And so how do you, part of what we talk about, and these are the kind of issues in a Vistage group will bring to the group in issue processing, and they'll put it out for the group, and the group will ask questions and work back and forth and come up with possible solutions for the member. And this is one of the key things that we do in Vistage groups, but it's largely a culture issue, but it's external to the company. So anyway, all that to say that problem is huge, right?
I wonder too, Tom, if you could speak into this with some of your thoughts. Is it a matter of how we define success? Because when I think about those companies, you use the word, you kind of did air quotes again around
Yes.
like success,
Right.
monetary success.
Right.
How do we need to rethink success?
Sure. That's a great question, and one I'm not super prepared to answer definitively right now. But I think one of the things that I see in newer companies, and I'm very blessed to be able to work with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses run by millennials and up and coming people, and there's a much more kind of social view of how, and I'm not talking politics here. I'm talking about what is the purpose of a corporation. Now they've got their shareholders and their employees to consider. So yes, the company is there to make a profit and to hire people and provide that value to society. But at the same time, if it is doing that in a way that is downgrading or degrading or defeating people, I think that's gone on for years. For those of you that can't see, I don't think anybody can see it. I don't think we're videotaping this, right? So I started my career in the 80s out of graduate school, and things have changed so much, right? But I definitely think that now there's more of an idea that companies should treat people well. And how long ago? 40, 30, 40 years ago. I don't think they thought about that so much. Your thoughts, Andy?
I would agree. I think the idea of culture and success is changing, that
Mhm.
you really can't have success is no longer defined by just metrics. I think especially millennials and a younger generation, they want a workplace that they come to, that they feel valued, that they feel like they have a purpose and meaning and
Absolutely.
significance. And it's just a new way that we're defining success. I think in a lot of ways it's healthier. I think in some ways, maybe not so much, because of our individualistic mindset on everybody is there to serve me, and not so much I'm here to give into an organization to help the organization grow. But there are different trade-offs to this, right? Different trade-offs to
Mhm.
these decades of transition into how we view success and culture. And every time we transition into a new form of culture or success or what it means to be a company, there are benefits and there are trade-offs to that.
Mhm.
And I think we're facing one of those right now.
Right.
Well, and just like you said, it's decades of transition, right?
Yep.
Because you think back in the day, I have family members who worked in a mine, and you go to work, you do your job, you do your stuff on your tractor, you leave. You have a paycheck, you put food on the table for your family. And that's where it ended, right? It wasn't how happy, how connected, how, are you your authentic self at work? Like that wasn't part of the conversation, right?
Right.
And then Andy, you mentioned millennials, and yes, it can go both ways. You can definitely push the limits, but I appreciate these millennials kind of pushing the envelope a little bit because it's taken till now for them to really kind of put the light of, hey, I don't have to work here. My boss is uh whatever word, I don't have to put up with this crap anymore. Or, my coworkers don't align with me and it's a toxic work environment. I don't have to do this anymore. So this whole conversation around culture, it's so different now than what it used to be. And that's the whole purpose of having, individuals like both of you now is that you can thrive supporting these companies, supporting these CEOs because now it is more than just culture is more than just, oh, I'm happy when I go to work. That's not what it is.
Right.
It's I can go to work, I can be myself, I feel connected, I feel comfortable. There's so many pieces. My values align. There's so many pieces that come together that make what we say, one word culture. There's so much more
Right.
included into that. But the two of you are allowed to now have that opportunity, right? To actually thrive and support these companies.
It's just such a great thing to be talking about, and just as you said, Kendra, it's become a selling points for companies.
Mhm.
It's almost I could almost say it's almost more important than salary at this stage of the game.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know I talk to CEOs all the time. That's what I do most of my days, and I can tell you in the last year in COVID, the single most difficult thing CEOs and presidents of companies had to face was hiring good people.
Mhm.
Which is sort of counterintuitive, but that's the way it was, right? And salary wasn't an issue.
Mhm.
And I don't think culture and salary were the issues here, but it's something that they struggle with, and it's something that there's a limited workforce, and companies have to compete.
Mhm.
Pay's important, of course, but I'm seeing that if the culture isn't there, then people are not going to want to work.
Yeah. And
Not
if
at
you
that
have
company.
these companies that are similar, ironic, I wrote down this quote: culture is sometimes the only thing that your competitor can't copy. So if
Yeah.
the pay is this, right? If you're looking at,
Right.
a particular industry, pays the same, location distance from your house is the same. And, you look at all of these variables, but people are going towards the culture. And then the culture itself, Andy, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. There's so many other pieces that are influencing your company now because your culture, if your culture is strong, your people are going to talk about it. Guess what? That's free marketing for your company now. They're now the best recruiters. They're bringing
Right.
in people that they know they're not going to tell their friends if they work for a shitty company. They don't want to bring them on the team. But if they truly believe in what they're doing and the company that they're doing it for, now that's recruitment, right? The strong culture then translates into higher retention,
That's super important.
right? So now it's all of these
Absolutely.
pieces. It's not just the cool thing. Hey, have a fun culture, have a pinball machine in the office. It's
And
way beyond.
leaders actually want that. They do. If you talk to them and sit with them, they don't want to be a hard hammer that comes down. They want to be someone who creates a space where people thrive, where
Mhm.
people feel valued, where people are successful. They want to do that. There's just more than anybody else in the organization, the leader carries so much on their plate at all times, emotionally, relationally, personally, professionally. They have to carry so much that in the midst of those good desires, they get weeded out by having to meet budget, having to have these difficult conversations, having to fire these people, having to put out 20 fires in the last hour. So it's not that it's not important to them. They're just running around in their fight, flight, or freeze part of their brain all day
Mhm.
long. And we need to support them to figure out how to be more grounded and regulated, how to manage stress better.
Mhm. Yeah. So we are getting close to the hour. It's amazing that this happens. I do have a question that I want to ask both of you at the end, but I want to give you a moment. Andy, you've said a couple of things, and Tom, you've said a couple of things of, oh, we'll talk about that later. The later is now. So I want to give both of you the chance to really get out, what are the other things that you want folks to know as far as like Andy, what you've been saying, and Tom, you've been saying, really supporting that CEO because we
Right.
focus so much on the CEO supporting the employees, but really this whole time we've talked about the opposite is really giving that CEO more of the support and the understanding as well. So I want to give both of you that chance, whatever else you want to kind of get out of the table.
Go ahead.
Part of it is you've noticed me multiple times today circle back around to bring balance to this conversation. We're poking holes in leaders,
Mhm.
right? We're talking about their problems. And in order to do the work that I do, I have to have a really high level of empathy for these leaders. I have to be there as their advocate, and I speak with both compassion and candor to them. But I think that's something that we need to remember as we begin to poke holes in leaders and assess and critique their leadership. We need to develop a sense of empathy and get in their shoes and understand how incredibly difficult it is. My whole job over the last year specifically has been getting in the minds of leaders to try to understand how difficult it is for them. It's not to tell them something that they need to know. It's not trying to fix something. It's simply trying to make sense of their world. And if we could do a better job culturally and have conversations around not just poking holes in leaders, but actually creating empathy and space around the complexities of leaders, holding them accountable, but also having a high level of compassion and candor with them, I think that would be really, really valuable. And I do that because of the safe space that I create for leaders, but I think we need more safe spaces for leaders to show up as they are
Mhm.
so that they can begin to decrease shame, say what needs to be said, feel what needs to be felt, and out of that process, express failure and then grow. It's
Mhm.
all about moving into the vulnerability so that they can grow and be better leaders. And that starts with a non judgmental, non shaming environment.
Right. Yeah, that's great and totally true. I think one of the things that is difficult for leaders is inertia. There may be CEOs, presidents, or people leading civic organization or a family, and they're saying, "Yeah, this makes sense," and they don't really even know how to get started. They're sitting in their office, they're sitting at their kitchen table, and they're thinking, "Good Lord, how do I do this?" And there's so many resources. Getting into a group with other CEOs to be vulnerable and to be authentic with them is one way. Andy and others like him are tremendous. Even just taking the reins yourself as a leader. I didn't know that Catholic Education Arizona was a sponsor here because I
Mhm.
was speaking earlier with Nancy Padberg, who's the CEO of that organization.
Yes.
You know Nancy; she
And
was
a
on the show.
wonderful
Oh,
organization and a wonderful
oh,
culture.
she's incredible. She's
Yep.
been a good friend for a number of years. But so she and I are actually. She called me and said, "Hey, let's can we do something, this particular thing they're working on in their organization? I'd like to level up my senior staff's professional development. Let's put together a module." So, she took the initiative to call me. And so we're working something up for her for her staff. So, just starting with something, right? Just getting started on it because it's, the whole reason we're all here is because it's, hey guys, it's important, right? But just getting started on it, and you can start, all the way from a group level and all the way working with, through working with, real professionals like Andy. It's a great place to start.
You cannot do that alone. That's the biggest fallacy for leaders, is that I can muscle through this and figure this out on my own. Getting with an individual like Tom or a Vistage group or a coach is really valuable because you don't have to pull all that weight. You have another person on your team to help carry some of that weight. And if you look at all of the highest achieving professionals and leaders, they have groups, they have coaches who are experts in their unique field to help them be better. It's the leaders who feel like they can do everything on their own. Those aren't great leaders. So tap into other people's resources and use those, because you can't do that alone.
Yep. Karen and I have talked about this before. It's the same thing as you have a dentist that you go to, you have a doctor that you go to, you have a mental health professional that you go to, you have somebody that helps you with your finances. They're all professionals in these areas, and a mechanic, whatever it is, so that you don't have to try and make that happen. You have the support that makes that happen. Absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, there are not many YouTube videos on this kind of thing either. So,
right? There's only so many YouTube videos I can watch.
Just wait for it. It's coming.
I don't want to steal Andy's thunder here. Yeah, but there's some that are coming. I saw the preview the other day.
Yep.
Nice. The to be continued. So one of the things I want to wrap up with, whenever we have a company in here that we're highlighting for their company culture, I always ask them for a word that kind of describes their culture, right? With you two gentlemen, it's a little different. You are providing resources and support to build a good company culture. So similar question, but if you could kind of look at everything that you're doing and in one word, I know that's hard, but one word, kind of wrap up, what is it that you're doing to be able to support these CEOs in growing a good company culture?
Freedom.
Ooh, and why do you say that? You mentioned it earlier, but yes.
When leaders have the ability to bring the subconscious to the conscious, when they become aware of what's inside, they have power to make choice. And with choice comes freedom. And leaders who are not aware of what's going on inside don't have freedom, and they don't have choice because they're living out of their emotional part of their brain and they're unaware. They're going to arrive somewhere, and in that journey, they're going to lose all the most important things in their life, and they're not going to know how to stop that. I give leaders the power to become aware of choice and therefore have freedom for their life.
I love that.
Wow. Jeez. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. That's a tough one to follow.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm up. Coming from my point of view, I'd say collaboration.
And why is that your word to kind of summarize all of what you do?
What we do is bring CEOs together, again, to connect with other people in a similar situation and be able to share, to be able to learn, to be able to give, and to be able to receive. And the way we do that, and I keep using these words, the vulnerability, the trust, the authenticity, all this that we bring to the table is going to determine at what level and with what value we can interact. And so that collaboration is super important.
I love that. I love both of those words because those are two very strong words that are helping build the culture, but you two are two very strong individuals that are doing those things. And I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I want to give both of you the opportunity before we go to also let people know I can't just talk about you both as resources and then keep you a secret, right? I have to tell people how they can reach the two of you. So Tom, how can folks reach out to you, learn about Vistage, and how to get involved?
So probably one of the easiest ways to find me is Tom Goodman on LinkedIn, and just search for Tom Goodman Vistage, and I should come up. You can also get me by email at Thomas. Now this is kind of weird, I know. One of my biggest professional mistakes in my life was having Thomas.Goodman as opposed to Tom.Goodman, but it's Thomas.Goodman@VistageChair.com. thomas.goodman@vistagechair.com. But Tom Goodman, a Vistage chair named Tom Goodman in Phoenix, Arizona, that should be easy to find on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
They can go to my website at andymaurer.com, and on there, they're going to see really what I did for Tom is, coming to different CEO groups and educating leaders, educating CEOs around what does it mean to be an emotionally whole leader? What do we mean by that? How do we acquire that? And then they can also email me at Andy Maurer, andy@andymaurer.com.
He's
Awesome.
fabulous, people.
Thank you so much for both of you. This was a phenomenal conversation and probably needs a part 2. I've been saying that to a couple shows lately. So thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we completely step away, I do want to mention a little more about Catholic Education Arizona. As Tom, you said, they're fantastic. They are a sponsor for the show. For 23 years, Catholic Education Arizona has helped serve the underserved children with over $268 million in scholarships. Catholic high schools have a 99.4% graduation rate, and 97% move on to higher education or military service. Participating partners that we mentioned before, APS, BBVA, Grand Canyon University, all of those partners receive a dollar-for-dollar Arizona state tax credit. The corporate partners enjoy helping the future workforce, building the Arizona community, and future leaders. If you would love to support and be part of this and involved, please call them at 602-218-6542 or visit www.ceaz.org. That's ceaz.org. They are changing lives one scholarship at a time, and they are a company with a great company culture too. So they are actually going to be on next week, which will be really, really fun.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Terrific.
Nancy's going to be on, so that'll be a really fun
Super.
conversation. Yes. So until next time, thank you everyone for listening. We love being able to highlight companies that are crushing it with a good culture. But in order to do that, we have to highlight the resources like you two that are making that happen. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Culture Crush, the only podcast out there that does a deep dive of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, please reach out to Kendra Maples on LinkedIn or email us at culturecrushpodcast@gmail.com.